Hello everybody, thanks for clicking on this video. James Cards FC here. Today I'm going to be bringing you a really exciting topic in my opinion. This has been the most fun presentation that I think I've put together in my career so far, I guess you would say, on YouTube. So really excited to talk about this today. I'm calling it ProspectBall, how Darwin Nunez exposed inefficiencies in the prospect market. So we're going to talk about Darwin Nunez and basically how he went from $65 to $1,500 and how we can use that perhaps in the future to better understand where market inefficiencies might lie, specifically talking about the prospect market. So let's go ahead and start with a little story introduction here. So, in 2002, the Oakland A's of Major League Baseball had a serious problem. Their homegrown talent had become too expensive to retain, and despite fielding one of the best teams in baseball in 2001, they were forced to tear it all down and rebuild the roster for 2002 because their best players were going to be bought up by the bigger money teams in the league. So, with significantly less money and than their competitors, Oakland was able to rebuild a playoff caliber team in 2002 despite losing some of their top talent to these other top teams, and they ended up outperforming those top teams despite having less money. The question everyone asked at the time was, how were they able to do this? And the reasoning behind it is called Moneyball, and there is an amazing book that I think anybody that's interested in business should read by Michael Lewis. It's called Moneyball, or you can alternatively just watch the movie starring Brad Pitt. Not nearly as educational or interesting, but they're both out there. I would definitely recommend reading Moneyball if you're into data, markets, or anything having to do with business. It is an amazing book. So, with that being said, Moneyball basically means using data to find market inefficiencies that competitors at the time are currently overlooking. So, for the Oakland A's, these were undervalued statistics like on-base percentage in an era where teams were really focused on batting average, when on-base percentage was a better metric for actually showing how valuable a player was. But in any sense, they were using more advanced and better metrics than the other teams at the time, so they were able to beat them despite having far less money. So today, I'll be showing how Darwin has exposed market inefficiencies in the prospecting market to generate insane returns, which have been 20x in some cases, despite the fact that we are facing a very down market. His stuff has been red hot. So we'll start off with talking about his sales history here. So I went to Terapeak and I looked at his green Obsidian out of 25. This is one of the ones that has decently solid sales. He just doesn't have a lot of cards to go off of. So it was nice to use this one because you have clear timeline of why the prices were what they were at those times. So this is the table I titled How to 20x Your Investment in 7 Months. We'll start at the bottom here. For the first sale, it was $65 in October. He was a budding star in the Portuguese League, but nothing more. Really not any sort of following in the hobby, just a budding star in the Portuguese League. Then we move to January, where Benfica advances to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, but they get matched against Liverpool. So he's seen more mainstream hype at this point, but matchup with Liverpool upcoming means they're going to be knocked out here pretty soon. So he does receive a boost, but it's not a huge boost because people know he's just going to get knocked out, and when he gets knocked out, people are going to ignore him, or at least that's what you would think at the time. So then we move into phase 3, which is when we get to the mainstream transfer hype after worldwide exposure. This happens in May of 2022. So after playing against Liverpool, I believe he scored a goal or two in that tie. He starts getting a lot more headlines around the globe. People start really looking at his numbers in the Portuguese League. Everybody starts talking about him from a transfer perspective. Where's he going to go? He's going to be this world-class striker at one of the top clubs in the world. And so the hype machine starts building and building for him, when before he was just some random star in the Portuguese League. Now he is seen as a world-class player that is going to transfer to a huge club and make a big difference going forward. So then we reach the final point that just happened this past week, where he gets his dream transfer to Liverpool and his prices explode again, going from $750 to $1,500. So over the course of 7 months, this investment 20x'd, which is just ridiculous, especially considering the market that we're in. And if you want to think about something even more crazy, this is the same card, but out of 11. It sold for almost $10,000 over the past couple days, and it sold in February for $375. So that one is a 25x if you were fortunate enough to make that play in February, and that's a 4-month play. So that happened even after Benfica advanced to the quarterfinals of the Champions League and were going to be knocked out by Liverpool, but the matches hadn't been played yet. If you bought in then, you made an insane amount of money. So what can we learn from this? We're going to talk about the inefficiencies that this helped unveil. So the inefficiency number one is lack of sets. So most prospects these days are in 10 plus sets and have 250 plus rookie card variations. Already for the 2021-22 class, there have been 5, maybe 6 Topps Champions League sets already released, with more well on the way. Add in Premier League and Bundesliga league specific products, and some players are already nearing 10 sets just in 2021-22. Since Darwin played in the Portuguese League, he was not included in the Bundesliga Premier League sets and was absent from Topps Chrome Champions League, making his only appearance 2020 Obsidian from a card perspective. Of course, he also has stickers and he has some Topps Now stuff, but his only real mainstream hobby release is Obsidian, and that's why these prices are going insane. So, just from a card number perspective, Sidney Raybiger already has 118 cards, and we're not even close to halfway done with the amount of product that will come out this year, so his has the potential to get over 400 or 500 different cards. Pedri has 264 different rookie card variations, and Darwin Nunez has 13, 12 from Obsidian, and then I added in his one sticker, so he has 13 different cards. Compared to 118 on Raybiger that will grow to 300 or 400, and 264 on Pedri that is done growing, but he's in the same rookie class as Darwin Nunez. So you can see the supply and demand issue that happens here when Darwin Nunez does something incredible. His cards can move up at ridiculous rates because he only has 13 of them. Inefficiency number 2, he plays in an unpopular league, or at least played in an unpopular league. So it's no secret that the hobby attention is heavily slanted in favor of the top teams in the top leagues. Outside of the Champions League, matches being played by teams outside the Premier League and La Liga and Bundesliga are seemingly ignored by the mainstream hobby, and that's especially the case when we start talking about teams outside of the top 5 leagues. So this works two ways. There are less hype on the prospects outside of the top 5 leagues, which means there's lower entry price point potential because there's less people looking at these prospects. There's also less hype on those prospects outside the top 5 leagues, which means, I think I just said the same thing twice, but in any event, there's less hype on the prospects outside the top 5 leagues, so there's also lower checklist potential. So not only are people less inclined to know who they are and pay big prices for them, they're a lot more likely to have less cards than the average player because they're not going to be in the Champions League checklist, they're not in Bundesliga, they're not in La Liga, they're not in Serie A, they're not in any of these special sets that come out for all these individual leagues. They're probably just going to make it in 1 or 2 products, if they make it in any products, considering there's not a lot of hype on their team or them themselves. So it creates this perfect storm scenario, basically, by playing in an unpopular league. So I want to talk about this quickly. Darwin was not an unknown talent if you're paying attention to the Portuguese league. I made this circle right here. This is when his rookie green was sold for $65 that eventually ended up selling for $1,500 this past week. So he was already a $30 million valued transfer player at that point, and he was a 21-year-old star forward. He was already probably the best player in the Portuguese league at that time. So yeah, this was not a surprise if you were watching Portuguese league or paying attention to the league. He was already one of the stars of the league, and people just weren't paying attention from a mainstream hobby perspective, but the data was already there if you wanted to do this sort of digging. So, inefficiency number 3, age discrimination. This is really interesting. So, when Obsidian was released, Darwin was already 21 years old, and he turned 22 just a few months later in June of 2021. So, the vast majority of hot prospects in the hobby are teenagers because you can dream on how good a 17 or 18-year-old might be in the next 3 to 4 years. So, we talk about guys like Gavi or Sidney Raybiger or Pedri, or insert any of these other guys on the list as maybe someday they'll be a super world-class player and they'll be one of the top players in the world or the top player in their league. The thing is that Darwin had already become what the best case scenario is for many of these teenagers. Like, this would be a perfect scenario for Sidney Raybiger or any of the guys in the set. Benjamin Sesko. If Benjamin Sesko in 4 years became what Darwin is right now, you would say that is an incredible outcome. So Darwin was already at that point, and his prices were significantly discounted. So here are Darwin's stats from this past year. He played in 28 games in the Portuguese League and had 26 goals and 4 assists, 38% goal participation. In the Champions League, his goal participation was even better for his team. In 10 appearances, he scored 6 goals. And so in 3 or 4 years, if Benjamin Sesko, who's one of the hot prospects in this year's top set, ended up putting up these kind of numbers, you would say he is an insane talent, and this was a perfect outcome for him. You couldn't ask for much more. Darwin was already there. He'd already done it, and he was significantly cheaper. So That's where this whole age discrimination theory that I'm bringing in comes into play. Because he was 22 or 21 years old, he's ignored because I'd rather invest on a 17 or 18-year-old I can dream on becoming maybe one day Darwin instead of just buying Darwin. So, interesting thing going on there. And then we'll move into inefficiency number 4, the perfect transfer. This is the one inefficiency that you probably couldn't see coming and you definitely cannot bet on or bank on accounting for in the future. So, transferring to Liverpool is probably the best possible scenario for Darwin. It's a popular Premier League club. He's going to get obvious starters minutes. He's going to play in meaningful league matches. He's going to play in Champions League matches. And that's just a perfect storm scenario for him. If Darwin had transferred to a team like AC Milan, there would be far less hype. See Dusan Vlahovic. I'll talk about this as we get to the end of this slide. The market really only cares about around 10 clubs. Talking about the mainstream market, I'm not talking about everybody here. As a generalization, the market usually only cares about around 10 clubs. It's the obvious 10. It's the top 4 or 5 in the Premier League. It's the top 2 in La Liga. It's the top 2 in Bundesliga, and then PSG and slip in whoever's in the Champions League at that point. Those are the only teams the mainstream casual hobby really cares about. The rest of it pretty much gets ignored to bigger and bigger extents the further down on the team tier list you go. So Darwin landing at one of these 10 clubs is a minor miracle that perfectly exploited the inefficiency on the market. So Darwin's green Obsidian last sale before his transfer was $750. His first sale after the transfer was $1,500. So he doubled up in a matter of a week. For Dusan Vlahovic, his first sale before his transfer to Juve was $150, and his first sale after the transfer was $150. So that's taking averages. He might have moved up or moved down $20 or $30 in between there, but for the most part, Dusan's numbers stayed exactly the same, despite the fact that he transferred to a bigger club, because the hobby really doesn't care about Serie A, and the hobby really doesn't care about Juventus specifically in the Serie A. So, from that perspective, Dusan does not get this massive bump that Darwin does, specifically because he does not transfer to a big name club. If Dusan was the one to transfer to Liverpool instead of Darwin, Dusan would probably see the same sort of doubling effect that Darwin saw, because Dusan also has a very limited run of rookie cards. All right, so from all this information, how do we use it to capitalize on our current market? So I've put out this checklist of things that I would recommend doing if you were trying to create this Darwin method, and these are things that I am personally thinking about when I'm looking at prospecting cards. If I wanted to go that route to maybe have some more fun on the market and put some money into a more risky type of investment, but this is what I put together as a checklist. Number 1, you need to target players that have very few releases. If they're in the top sets, Champions League, Bundesliga, any of those sets, they're not going to be a good candidate for this because they're going to have way too many cards, and the more cards they have, the less price velocity you'll have if they do end up getting demand. So if they're any of the top sets, I would probably ignore them. You're specifically looking for guys that only made it into 1 or 2 sets, preferably somebody that just made it into 1 set with low number parallels. Number 2, target players that play outside the top 5 leagues and the MLS. I added the MLS there because MLS has their own specific sets, and the MLS, given that the hobby shifts mostly American, already has a lot of attention on it, and the top players and the top prospects in that league are already very well known. So I would specifically be targeting leagues like the ones I list here: Portugal, Netherlands, but not Ajax, because Ajax players are already in the top Champions League set and a variety of other sets. So Netherlands outside of Ajax, Belgium, probably outside of Bruges, because their prospects usually get into Topps Chrome, but perhaps some of them don't. And then Austria, obviously not Salzburg, because pretty much every Salzburg player is in every product. So that's a list of just 4 example leagues I would take a look at. There's probably a few leagues outside of those, but those would be the types of leagues I would be looking at for this method. Number 3, target players that are already performing, even if they're older, which might be better. As we saw in the age discrimination example, the fact that they're older might actually benefit you, because people don't really want to put money into older prospects because they're seen as less exciting, because we already know what they are, even if what they are is world class. And yeah, target players that are already performing, because then if they're already performing, they're probably on track to get a transfer, which is point number 4. You need to get lucky with the transfer or just sell in the transfer hype. So, for example, Darwin Nunez had a big run-up as he was getting transfer hype, and then had an even bigger run-up as he moved. So, even if Darwin doesn't get the big move, his prices probably still stay around that $750 range, but that big move doubled them up again. So, in the transfer hype that comes to it, you could sell into it, or you could hold out and hope that the player goes to one of the top 10 clubs in the hobby. But that's a risk that you would take when you get to that point. But everything we talked about today is filled with risk. That's just another one of them. So let's talk about how this checklist would work out for a guy like Jonathan David, who, at least in my initial thoughts, would be a really good option for this for a couple of reasons. But once you start thinking about what sets he's in, it's probably not a great idea. So Jonathan David, is he in very few releases? No, he's in tops. So he's going to be in pretty much every single product for the rest of the year, and he's going to have a massive amount of print runs. Is he outside the top 5 league? No, but he doesn't play for a good, not good. He doesn't play for a top mainstream club in the French league. He plays for Lille, so some of his performance gets masked by the fact that nobody cares about Lille. So from that perspective, he's on the fringe, in my opinion, of if he's outside of a top 5 league. But for a top 5 league definition, he is inside the top 5 league, but I might be a little willing to bend the rules on that one, specifically because he plays for Lille and not PSG. Is he already performing / older? Yes, on both accounts. He is already performing. He's one of the better strikers in that league, and he performs extremely well for Canada in CONCACAF. And he is older. I believe he's 21 or 22, so people start to ignore him because he is older, but he is already a fringe world-class kind of striker, depending on where you want to rank him and how you define world-class. But he's trying to get to that level, and he's almost there if you go off his last couple years of stats. So, transfer hype coming. Yes, I don't know how much the transfer is already baked into his prices, but I honestly haven't heard that much transfer hype around him. It could just be me being a dumb American and not paying attention to whatever the mainstream news is in Europe, but I just, in the hobby, haven't heard a lot of people talking about him transferring, so it's possible that the hype just isn't there yet, and he could get a move to one of those top 10 clubs, and that would definitely improve his market. So, from that perspective, that is how I would run through a checklist on a guy like Jonathan David. While he does have something going for him, the fact that he is not in very few releases really holds me back, and I would not personally be interested in a guy like Jonathan David just because he's in the top set and he's going to have 500 rookies or whatever it ends up being. Alrighty, so in conclusion, prospecting will always be a high-risk, high-reward game. Normally, we would think of prospecting as finding an unknown teenager that will rise to prominence on a popular club, or a superstar prospect like Gavi that will ascend to being one of the best players in the world. But Darwin has shown that there's another path, which has actually displayed much higher ROI potential because of the fact that the supply and demand factors are way more on your side when you're dealing with a player that had zero demand and a very low print run of cards to a player that now runs up to having maximum demand on the hobby and still that same extremely low number of cards. So, world-class players, not teenagers with potential outside the top 5 leagues with an opportunity to transfer to one of the biggest clubs in the world would be the formula here. Now, there is a chance that this is a one-time scenario and there will never be another Darwin Nunez type situation, but that is all part of the fun. When it comes to prospecting, fun, risk, however you want to define it, prospecting is out there in the modern market. This is another path that has been shown by Darwin on how you a theory and a methodology that you could go about prospecting. I wouldn't say should, because that's silly. There's no way you should prospect. But of the ways to prospect, this is a new one that I think is relatively interesting. So, and as I point out here, this card specifically 25x'd in the past 4 months. Is this going to be the greatest flip of 2022 for the soccer market? I think it definitely has the potential to. There's a chance some teenager or young world-class player at the World Cup comes out of nowhere and scores a bunch of goals and gets mainstream headlines and does something similar, but this was a perfect storm scenario. We're talking about a world-class player that was playing in a league that nobody cared about, that only had 13 rookie card variations total in one set, and so now he gets the transfer to the best club in the world. This is a perfect storm type scenario. Probably won't happen again, but it is another path that has been shown out there for prospecting. So I appreciate you guys listening to this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, like and subscribe for more content like this or other topics that I feel like covering. And always appreciate you guys. Hope you learned something. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next video.